We're here at the 10th Annual Elizabeth Dole Foundation's convening. I am joined by Liana Redshaw, who is a 2025 Elizabeth Dole Foundation Fellow. Welcome, Liana.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. I want to first start off, if you'd mind sharing a little bit about your backstory and how you became a family caregiver.
Yeah, so my husband and I have been married for 10 years as of this April. And prior to all of this happening, I worked in marketing, and I was pregnant with our third baby. I was, I think, around 4 months pregnant, and my husband Ryan went for a AT training, drill, and hurricane duty, so they were packed together. While he was there, he hit his head on the way out of a helicopter. He didn't report it at the time, but by the time he came home to me 3 months later, he could no longer go from one room to another, knowing where he was going. He couldn't change our youngest son at the time's diaper anymore. He couldn't make a baby bottle. So this sent me down a very long, windy road, ultimately discovering that my husband unfortunately had a genetic mutation, PSEN1, and was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's aggravated by the TBI. So that's kind of led me to where I am now.
When you first got the diagnosis, I'm imagining it's just shocking.
Yes.
Not to make light of it, there's a saying that a lot of people use, and it's when you've seen one person with dementia, you've seen one person.
Yes.
And that's what makes it so hard and difficult. But here, you guys are in your early 30s,
Early 30s, yeah.
Young children at home. What was the first thing that went through your mind as his wife?
What am I going to do? I mean, I was pregnant with Tallulah, my youngest, and that kind of set off a very complicated pregnancy. She ended up having fetal growth restriction because I was so stressed. We were going to 2 appointments a week, one for me and one for him. So there was a lot going on at that time, and yeah.
Yeah. When you became this caregiver now, what kind of resources did you find in the onset? We always say you don't know what you don't know, and you
Yes.
don't know what you don't need to know. Most people don't prepare or plan to be a caregiver. You plan and prepare to be a parent.
Yes.
What was those first weeks, days, months like for you?
So a lot of it was a battle to get the diagnosis because a lot of people, I mean, he looked fine.
Right.
So completely invisible diagnosis. But, quickly, things started to fall apart. And one of the first organizations that stepped in was Wounded Warrior Project.
Okay.
And they have been instrumental in helping my family navigate forward. They have covered adult daycare for him. They've covered a life skills person, his music therapy. I've also received help from Simplify. They helped me move across the country, helped me get into the home I'm in now. And also I did receive a good amount of support from his unit. The men from his unit came out, they packed up my house, they loaded up the trucks, they helped me in a lot of ways. Also emotionally, I still call a lot of them for support. So I had a good deal of help, and there's also been a good deal of challenge.
I'm sure. When you're going through those, first weeks, months, when did you eventually discover the Elizabeth Dole Foundation?
So pretty far into it,
Yeah.
actually. I went through all kinds of different resources and digging. Unfortunately, there's not a lot out there for early onset Alzheimer's. But I did eventually discover a town hall meeting for Elizabeth Dole, and I attended that virtually. And when I attended that, I was kind of like, oh, wow, this looks like this could be helpful.
Right.
And kind of started going down that path. And then eventually I got an email about applying to be a fellow.
Wow.
And that's what I did.
Okay,
Yeah.
tremendous. When your husband received that diagnosis and, being in his early 30s,
Yes.
did it add an additional level of complexity for you as a family, having to explain to peers, my husband has
an
Alzheimer's?
incredible amount of complexity.
What would you want people to know about that? Because, there's people in their 70s, 60s, 80s, and family members get a diagnosis, and then other family members might not acknowledge it because mom looks fine, grandma looks fine, and here's somebody, a healthy,
Yeah,
you know,
seemingly.
military personnel that's fit as can be now has this diagnosis. I'm
Yeah.
sure that had to be very difficult on top of the other things you're dealing with.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of misconceptions about Alzheimer's and dementia, namely being that it's not just a memory issue. A lot of it started out being a reaction, a speed reaction issue. So we'd all stop and he'd keep walking because his body wasn't communicating, oh, I need to stop. So I would have to put my hand out so he wouldn't walk into oncoming traffic, which almost happened many times. In addition to that, it's a judgment and perception issue. So unfortunately, my husband is now late stage 6, and he needs 24/7 supervision. He can't be alone with his children. He, can't go outside by himself. He can't cook meals. He can't he needs to be reminded to eat and drink. He needs prompting for all of those things. It's so many people say, "Oh, does he still remember who you are?" Which is such an offensive thing to say to somebody who has a loved one struggling with Alzheimer's. And luckily enough, right now he does still know who me and my children are. But I have watched him holding our baby and forget that he's holding her.
Yeah. And if you don't mind me asking, having children adds another layer of complexity to it. As a parent, and for people watching or listening to this, is there any wisdom or advice you could give to them if they may experience something similar, how to approach that with the children?
Yeah, so, I really try to meet my kids where they're at. I think I'll just say, I think one of the biggest ways our family has, and I have been affected, is how it's affected my motherhood. I always wanted to be a mom. It's, my biggest accomplishment in life. And trying to guide the children through this, knowing, their dad isn't who he was, but for them, they don't know, they don't know that. So just being around him still is worth it.
Yeah, I have 3 young children. They came with us here to D.C. They're having a great time. But, I always, when you have that fatherhood, motherhood, it does add a layer that is always being navigated step by step. And then to add that component into it, their dad is a strong military person. And, and having to watch that, I'm sure, is just got to be one of the worst forms of parenting you ever imagined you'd have to go through.
Yes.
Do you have recommendations if children ask questions, and I'm sure it's personal for each family, but do you think it's good to let them know up front? What would you recommend?
In my experience, I've been truthful with my children. I have responded, again, age appropriately, but literally just 2 days before I arrived here, my 8-year-old asked me, "Is Daddy dying?" on the way home from school. Just a routine carpool ride home, and that question is coming up. So, with each of them, you parent your children differently, right? So my responses vary, but I have found that being truthful is the best way forward, and just reminding them that, I love them very much and their daddy loves them very much, and there's nothing that they did.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great advice. With, with you guys relocating now so you have more support, what kind of support has the Elizabeth Dole Foundation been for you and your family?
Yeah, so, one of the biggest things truly it has been becoming a fellow and meeting other people like me. And also, when I first applied, so provide some clarity here, my husband doesn't live with us anymore. When we moved to Illinois, I had to make a very hard decision that it wasn't safe. It wasn't safe for the kids. So I placed him in an apartment. It's about 10 minutes from my house, and I have rotating caregivers 24/7. So in that, I had gone to them, and when I applied for this, I said, I don't know if I really qualify because he doesn't live with me. And yes, I manage all of his care, and he's with me on the weekends. But, I don't know if I really qualify. And they stopped me very quickly and said, you absolutely do qualify. And for me, that was huge because I've carried so much guilt. for not keeping him in the house with us, even though logically I knew it was not safe. Doors were being left open, stoves were being left on. I've got a 20-month-old at home. Like, it's just not safe, right, for somebody with dementia. But them giving me that acknowledgement has really helped me
Sure.
move forward. In addition to, the emotional support, they're also helping me navigate. My husband still is not service connected. I'm still not receiving any benefits from the VA. So as we speak right now, there's lots of people pushing to make these connections happen for me and to make sure we do get service connected. Additionally, we are at the point where he needs memory care placement. The apartment and having him with caregivers has worked great, but unfortunately he has progressed and is now requiring more assistance beyond what we can do in home. So the Elizabeth Dole Foundation alongside Wounded Warrior Project is helping me to navigate that next step.
Wonderful. When we help families as well, and a lot of times we recommend, there's aid and attendance and there's these different benefits, but, aid and attendance, not everybody qualifies for. Were you able to find, is that the resources you're speaking about? Was that through Wounded Warrior?
Yeah, I'm not quite there yet
Okay.
because we don't have a VA rating.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that is the direction, if they ultimately service connect as they should, that we will qualify for that.
Absolutely. So, Liana, one more question before we go, and thank you for your time, and again, thank you to you and your husband's service and sacrifice. When you run into a new caregiver, what is your number one recommendation for them as they navigate this journey?
Trust your intuition. Ask a lot of questions and don't take no for an answer.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.